If you have been creating content for any amount of time, you've probably heard the phrase coined by Bill Gates that says content is king. Now, I recently heard the phrase, if content is king, then consistency is queen. I want to take that a step further today and say that if content is king and consistency is queen, then your capacity is the key. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Successful Podcasting Unlocked. I'm your host, Alicia Galati. I'm the founder of Galati Media, which is a full-service podcast management agency that helps business owners launch and maintain lead-generating podcasts. Today's question is, should my podcast be weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly? I recently got this question from a prospective client. They had a bi-weekly show, so every other week they were creating an episode, but they were so inconsistent with when those episodes would release, and they'd been really struggling with that. And that's something that we see a lot of people who come to us, they're struggling with this ability to consistently show up for their audience with a podcast. I actually believe that that's why 90% of podcasters actually do not make it to 25 episodes, because most of the time they are struggling with coming up with new content, coming up with new ideas, and they're feeling frustrated. And I don't want you to feel this way at all. So with this phrase in mind of if content is king, we know that we have to consistently show up with content. We have to create content again and again and again to keep our audiences engaged, especially when we are business owners. So if content is king and consistency is queen, we have to be consistent. But at what point do we decide what that consistency actually looks like? This is where this question I think is so valuable, and it's something that we can consider, especially when we're approaching social media or approaching how we're going to show up in other areas of our content. But what about our podcast? If our podcast should be weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, there's so many options, but how do we know which is going to be best for us? That is where this capacity is the key really fits into all of this. And I think that that really helps us. I was talking to my dear friend, Emily Aborn. She is a copywriter, about this exact topic. She has a lot of feelings about this word consistency, and I absolutely love what she says about it. But she tends to take the approach that when we think about consistency, we almost put ourselves on a hamster wheel of consistency. We think that consistent means daily, it means twice a day, it means every week. But really, it's about the frequency that you decide that you're going to show up. So if you say, I'm going to send an email to my email list every week, if you send it every week in that frequency, then you have been consistent. The same goes for podcasting. If I say I am going to show up every other week for my audience on my podcast, and I show up every other week with quality content, and I never miss an every other week, then that means that I have been consistent. This is where that capacity is key, really ties into all of this, is that I get to decide what my capacity is. And I decide. Not just I get to, but I decide. My body decides, my lifestyle decides. There's no changing that unless my lifestyle or my ability to show up changes. And that's why every season in your podcast, every season in your life, you're going to have different abilities to show up in a certain capacity. So when I think of this word capacity, now my background's in manufacturing and supply chain, capacity is important. It's so stinking important. But what does this mean in layman's terms? I have my water bottle here and it holds 24 ounces of water. That is its capacity. It can only hold 24 ounces. If I fill it higher, it will overflow. This is the same with our podcasts and our ability to show up regularly, consistently, based on what we have the ability to do. So no one can tell you what your frequency should be. No one can tell you what your capacity should be. It is up to you to decide, do I have the ability to show up weekly for my audience? Do I have the ability to show up every other week, or does monthly make the most sense for me? That is the answer to the question. Is it depends, as usual. But I hope that this got you thinking about maybe how you're showing up, not just in your podcast, but also in other areas of your business, other areas of your marketing, and really considering, am I burning myself out to be quote unquote consistent? Or do I need to adjust my consistency because of my capacity? If you have your own podcasting questions, I would love to answer them. Please feel free to send me a DM on Instagram at alicia.galati. We also have a Successful Podcasting Unlocked account, or you can go to successfulpodcastingunlocked.com to get your questions answered on future episodes. Until next time, happy podcasting.